The Grand Hall was filled with guests from all corners of the galaxy. Alien species, royal families, and dignitaries had traveled far to attend the most anticipated event of the year, the Universal Gathering. This event was a celebration of peace, unity, and alliances, held once every decade on the planet Zora. Its beautiful city, with silver towers reaching for the skies, reflected the brightness of the stars above. Among the many nobles, delegates, and visitors, there was one figure who stood out, not because of her beauty, though she was undeniably beautiful, but because of the mystery that surrounded her. She was the veiled princess, Syria, the heir to the Zorian kingdom. Syria's appearance was unlike any other. She wore a long, flowing robe made of shimmering material that seemed to change color with each movement, shifting between soft blues and rich purples. But it was her veil that caught the most attention. It was not like any veil from earth, nor was it a simple cloth. Her veil was a fine, translucent fabric that barely touched her skin, but held an air of power, secrecy, and grace. Through the veil, only her eyes were visible, eyes that seemed to hold centuries of knowledge, and yet there was a sadness in them. Despite her striking features, no one dared approach her. It wasn't because she was feared, though some whispered that her species held immense power. It wasn't even because of her royal status, though many sought alliances with her family. It was because of the veil. For Zorians, the veil was not just a symbol of beauty or modesty. It was a statement of their royal lineage and untouchable status. To approach the princess without an invitation was considered disrespectful, and no one wished to make the mistake of angering a royal family. So, Syria stood alone in the Grand Hall, surrounded by a crowd of people who avoided her as if she were invisible. The conversations around her were loud, filled with laughter and political strategies, but no one even looked in her direction. Her isolation felt heavy in the air. It was as if the people around her feared the unknown, feared what lay behind the veil, and feared what might happen if they dared to challenge tradition. Xuria's gaze moved over the crowd. Her sharp eyes caught glimpses of groups of people laughing, shaking hands, and exchanging gifts. They were all so confident, so sure of themselves, but she could not join them. She had been taught since birth that her purpose was to serve her people, to unite kingdoms through marriage and alliance. But the thought of being nothing more than a political tool, a prize to be won, made her heart ache. As she stood there in the corner of the hall, a young human entered the room. His name was Liam, a soldier who had been invited to attend the gathering as part of his diplomatic mission. He wasn't wealthy or powerful, and he didn't hold any position of high status. In fact, he wasn't even important enough to be invited to the royal dinner. Yet, something about him stood out. His simple yet confident stride, his curiosity, and the way his eyes seemed to take in everything around him made him seem different from the other guests. Liam noticed the princess immediately. He had heard rumors of her, of course, but he had never seen her up close. He could feel the weight of the silence around her, the way people avoided her like she was a ghost. But instead of walking away like everyone else, Liam took a step toward her. As he approached, he could see the sadness in her eyes. They were beautiful eyes, but they were full of loneliness. She was surrounded by people, yet she seemed so far away. There was something about that loneliness that tugged at him, something that made him want to bridge the gap between them. "Your Highness," Liam said, his voice respectful but genuine. "May I have a moment of your time?" Xuria's eyes widened slightly, surprised that someone had dared approach her without the formal invitation of the royal court. For a moment, she said nothing. She simply looked at him, her expression unreadable through the veil. Liam, undeterred by her silence, continued, "I apologize if I am intruding, but it seems you are alone. I just thought you might appreciate some company." The princess studied him for a moment longer. Her mind was filled with questions. Why was this human speaking to her? What did he want from her? Was he another person interested only in using her for political gain? But there was something different about him. She could see it in the way he spoke, not with the calculated charm of the other diplomats, but with sincerity. "I do not mean to offend, Your Highness," Liam added, his voice softer now. "It's just that, sometimes, even the most powerful people need someone to talk to." Zyria was taken aback. She had heard the whispers of how powerful humans were, how they had conquered planets and created empires. But this human, standing before her, was not here to conquer anything. He had no interest in her kingdom, no political agenda. His words were simple, yet they felt like a breath of fresh air in the stuffy room. Finally, after what seemed like an eternity, Zyria spoke. "You are different from the others." Liam smiled, a small, humble smile. "I guess I don't have a lot to lose, Your Highness, but I do believe that sometimes the best connections happen when you least expect them." Zyria stared at him, unsure of what to say next. But for the first time in a long time, she felt a flicker of hope. Perhaps there was more to life than the role she had been born into. Perhaps there was a chance for something real, something beyond the veil. As the evening unfolded, the grand hall grew livelier. People continued to mingle, laugh, and exchange words filled with diplomacy and ambition. Music played softly in the background, while elegant dancers twirled in rhythm to a melody that seemed to echo through the entire palace. But in the midst of it all, Zyria stood still, like a solitary statue, her veil shimmering slightly as she breathed, her posture regal but distant. Liam noticed that while the other guests were wrapped in conversations and alliances, Zyria remained in her corner, unbothered by the crowd. He had seen the way people avoided her, how they seemed to respect her space, as if her very presence was a challenge to approach. There was an invisible barrier around her, and yet it was this distance that made Liam want to know her even more. Taking a deep breath, he made his way across the room. His footsteps were steady, but his heart raced. As he drew closer, the light from the chandeliers above caught the edges of her veil, giving it an almost ethereal glow. It wasn't the kind of light that made her look like a figure of royalty or power. It was something gentler, something more personal. It was as if the veil itself held secrets, waiting to be uncovered by someone willing to look beyond the surface. When Liam reached her, Zyria didn't immediately acknowledge his presence. She was still looking at the scene around her, her eyes scanning the room as if searching for something, or perhaps for someone. He wasn't sure what to expect, but he knew one thing. He wasn't going to let fear stand in the way of a simple conversation. "Your Highness," Liam said, his voice steady but polite. "I hope I'm not disturbing you." Zyria turned her gaze to him. There was no anger or coldness in her eyes, only curiosity. He could feel the weight of her stare, as if she were deciding whether to trust him with her attention. After a brief pause, she nodded slightly, acknowledging his presence. "You are not disturbing me," she said, her voice soft but clear. "But most find it difficult to approach me." Liam smiled, a little embarrassed but not deterred. "I suppose that's true, but I don't see why that should be a reason to avoid someone. You've been standing here all alone, and I figured, well, maybe you'd like some company." Zyria tilted her head, as if considering his words. Her voice was low but rich with an air of wisdom beyond her years. "Company, you say? I have never been without company. But there are few who truly see me as I am. Most only see what they want." Liam took a moment to digest her words. He had heard stories of the Zorian royal family, of their traditions, and the immense power they wielded. But he hadn't expected Zyria to speak so candidly about her isolation. Most royal figures were surrounded by sycophants, eager to be near them for their own gain. Yet here was Zyria, a princess of a vast kingdom, admitting that her company was more out of duty than genuine companionship. "I can't pretend to understand what it's like to be in your shoes," Liam said. "But I know one thing for sure. I don't want anything from you. I'm not here to try to win favor or make a deal. I just thought you might like a moment of peace from the chaos around us." Her expression softened slightly, though her veil still hid most of her face. Zyria was quiet for a moment, as though weighing his words. She had been raised to view people through a lens of power and alliances, her life a web of expectations. No one had ever spoken to her like this before. No one had ever treated her like she was just a person. "Why?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why would you choose to talk to me, a stranger, when so many others avoid me?" Liam met her gaze without hesitation. "Maybe because I don't think being a stranger is something that should stop two people from having a conversation. Maybe I just want to see you as you are. Not as a princess, not as royalty, but as someone who is just human." Xuria's eyes flickered at his words. For a moment, she almost felt something stir within her, an emotion she couldn't quite name. It was as if his words had opened a door in her heart that she had closed long ago. She had always been seen through the eyes of her people as something beyond ordinary, beyond human. But Liam had seen her as just another person, no different from anyone else. She had always been told that her value was in her royal blood, her ability to unite kingdoms and form powerful alliances. But here was a human who didn't care about any of that. He didn't care about her title or her lineage. He saw her for who she truly was, a person who longed for something real, something pure. I don't know how to respond to that," Xuria admitted, her voice barely audible. "I have spent my whole life being seen as something to be admired, something to be feared, but never as someone to be understood." Liam nodded slowly. "I think that's the problem with titles and power. They can make people forget that everyone has a story, a heart. No one should ever be judged by their status or appearance." Xuria looked at him for a long moment. She had heard many words of wisdom in her life, but something about Liam's simple yet profound statement struck her deeply. Perhaps for the first time, someone had truly seen her for who she was, not for what she could offer. "I never imagined someone would speak to me like this," she said, almost as if to herself. "But you seem different." Liam smiled gently, though there was no arrogance in it, only kindness. "Maybe I'm just a little less afraid of the unknown than others." For the first time since her arrival at the gathering, Xuria felt something she hadn't felt in years, a connection, a bond, however small, that bridged the gap between her and another soul. She didn't know where it would lead, but in this moment, it didn't matter. And for the first time, the veil she wore didn't seem so heavy. The evening wore on, and the grand hall buzzed with the hum of conversation, the clink of glasses, and the soft music that played from a distant corner. Despite the activity around her, Xuria remained in her corner, though now there was a slight shift in her posture. She wasn't standing as stiffly as before. Her body had relaxed, and for the first time, she felt a sense of ease, thanks to the human who had dared to approach her. Liam stood beside her, not out of obligation or political necessity, but out of genuine curiosity. He wasn't interested in her royal blood or her family's wealth. He simply wanted to understand her as a person. And Xuria found that refreshing. No one else had ever approached her without ulterior motives. As the conversation between them grew more comfortable, Xuria felt a sense of peace. She found herself telling Liam about her life, about the weight of being born into a royal family, and the ancient traditions that bound her to her people. She spoke about the Zorian kingdom, a vast empire that spanned several planets, ruled by her family for centuries. "Our traditions are old," Xuria began, her voice quiet but clear. "The veil, it is more than just a symbol of our royalty. It represents our history, our culture. It is a sign of our status, our purity. For my people, it is a sacred tradition. When a Zorian royal wears the veil, it is said to protect them from the outside world, preserving their power, their essence. It is a part of who we are." Liam listened intently, fascinated by her words. He had never encountered a culture so deeply tied to such ancient practices. He could sense that the veil, for Xuria, was not just a physical barrier, but an emotional one as well. It separated her from the world, keeping her isolated, protected, and alone. "But you must understand," Xuria continued, "the veil is not just about beauty or protection. It is about duty. The Zorian royal family is meant to be a bridge between worlds, between species. My role was always clear. I was to be married to unite two powerful factions, to ensure peace and prosperity. I have spent my whole life preparing for this, being trained to rule, to command. But no one ever saw me. Not really. They only saw what I could do for them. Liam's heart softened at her words. He had known that royalty could be burdensome, but he hadn't realized the depth of the isolation it caused. He could only imagine what it would be like to live a life where everyone around you treated you as a means to an end, rather than as an individual. He thought about his own life. Simple, ordinary, but free. He had made choices for himself. He hadn't been bound by the expectations of others. The contrast between his life and hers felt like a chasm, but it also made him admire her more. Despite everything, Xuria had remained strong. Her ability to hold on to her own sense of self, even in the face of overwhelming pressure, was something Liam deeply respected. "Do you ever wish things were different?" Liam asked gently, not wanting to pry, but feeling the need to understand more of her struggle. Xuria hesitated for a moment, her eyes lowering, as if she were searching for an answer within herself. "I do. I have wondered what it would be like to live a life where I am not seen as a tool for power, where I am not expected to choose between duty and desire, where I could simply be me." Her voice trailed off, and for a moment, the only sound was the soft murmur of the crowd around them. Liam noticed the way Xuria looked at the people in the hall. There was a longing in her gaze, a yearning for something real, something honest. It was clear that the world she inhabited was not one of freedom or choice. It was one of obligation and control. "I can't imagine living like that," Liam said thoughtfully. "Having your entire future planned out for you, with no room to decide your own path. That sounds suffocating." Xuria smiled faintly, a soft, almost sad smile. "It is, but it's the way things have always been. I was born to rule, born to serve my people. I never had the luxury of dreaming of something different." Liam looked at her with understanding. "Maybe that's why you've been alone all this time. People see you as a symbol, not a person. They don't see the real you." Her eyes met his, and for the first time, she felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in years, a sense of recognition, of being truly seen. Liam wasn't looking at her as the princess or the heir to a vast kingdom. He was looking at her as a human being, someone who had feelings, dreams, and fears, just like anyone else. "Maybe," she said softly, "maybe that's why I've always hidden behind this veil. Not just to protect myself from the outside world, but to protect myself from the people I meet. From those who only see me as a prize to be won, a tool to be used." Liam felt a pang of sympathy for her. He had never been royalty, never had the weight of a kingdom on his shoulders. But he could understand the feeling of being trapped by the expectations of others. He knew what it was like to be judged for things outside of your control, to feel like your own desires didn't matter. "I don't know what it's like to be you," Liam said quietly, "but I do know this. No one should ever be treated as if they're just a means to an end. Not you, not anyone. You deserve to be seen for who you are, not what you can do for others." Xuria looked at him with a mixture of surprise and gratitude. She had never expected someone to speak to her like this, especially not a human. In her world, humans were often dismissed as insignificant, not important enough to interact with royalty. Yet here was Liam, treating her like she mattered. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Thank you for seeing me." For the first time, Xuria felt a weight lift from her shoulders. It wasn't just the veil, but the years of loneliness and isolation that had burdened her. For the first time, she felt like she was more than just a symbol. She was a person. The night continued, and the grand hall seemed to swell with energy. Guests from across the galaxy danced, laughed, and engaged in political discussions. Delegates from distant planets walked confidently through the crowded hall, exchanging favors and making deals. It was the kind of event that reinforced the importance of power, status, and influence, qualities that defined the very nature of Zora's elite society. Despite the dazzling display of wealth and power, Syria stood quietly by herself. The soft light of the chandeliers cast a gentle glow over her, but her presence remained unnoticed by most. Liam, however, had noticed her from the moment they had spoken, and he couldn't seem to shake the feeling that she was different. The more he spent time near her, the more he realized that the sadness in her eyes had nothing to do with the event or the people around her. It came from something deeper, something more personal. As they spoke, the noise and excitement around them faded into the background. Syria shared more about her life, about her duty, and the tradition she had been raised to uphold. Liam listened intently, asking questions, offering his thoughts, and never once making her feel as if she were an object to be admired, as so many others had. But it wasn't just Liam who took notice of her presence. A group of powerful delegates, led by an ambassador from the planet Voltria, walked over to Syria. Their conversation, filled with political maneuvering and careful alliances, was interrupted as they approached her. The ambassador, a tall, imposing figure, took one look at Syria and smiled, though it wasn't a kind smile. It was a smile full of intentions, of expectations. "Ah, Princess Syria," he said with a bow, his voice smooth and polished. "I see you are still standing by yourself. It is quite rare for a royal of such stature to remain alone in a gathering like this." Syria's gaze shifted briefly to Liam, who stood beside her. The ambassador followed her line of sight, but quickly dismissed him. To most in this room, humans were little more than a curiosity, not worth their time. "I trust you've been enjoying yourself, Your Highness," the ambassador continued, his tone polite, but with an edge of sarcasm. "Though I must admit, I find it curious that you have not yet chosen your partner for the evening." He glanced pointedly at the other men and women in the room, most of whom were watching the princess closely, awaiting her decision. Syria's lips tightened. The weight of her title, of the expectations placed on her, seemed to press down harder with every word the ambassador spoke. She knew what he was insinuating. She had been trained her entire life for this moment. To choose a partner, one who could help her fulfill the political obligations required of her. It was a duty that had been forced upon her since birth. The ambassador's eyes gleamed as he took another step forward. "As you know, Princess, this gathering is not just a celebration of peace, but an opportunity for unions to be formed. It's a perfect time for you to choose a future ruler, someone to stand by your side in these difficult times." Liam noticed the shift in Syria's demeanor. The smile that had begun to form on her face was now gone, replaced by an unreadable expression. She stood taller, but there was something in her eyes that told Liam she was being pushed into a corner, one she didn't want to be in. But Syria said nothing. She simply nodded politely, as was expected of her. She could feel the weight of her people's eyes on her, the pressure mounting as they waited for her to choose, to make a decision. But she didn't want to. She didn't want to choose anyone based on their political status, based on what they could offer her kingdom. She wanted to choose for herself. Liam, who had been standing silently by her side, could feel the tension in the air. He wasn't blind to the power dynamics at play. He could see how others in the room treated Syria, not as a person, but as a commodity to be traded, a chess piece to be moved in the game of galactic politics. Liam stepped forward, placing a hand lightly on Syria's shoulder in a gesture of solidarity. "With all due respect, Ambassador, perhaps the princess isn't ready to make such an important decision right now. Maybe she would prefer to enjoy the evening and take some time before making a choice." The ambassador's eyes narrowed, but he didn't speak immediately. He hadn't expected the human to speak up, much less challenge him. He glanced at the others in his group, who exchanged uncomfortable looks. No one had ever dared question the choices of a royal, especially not in such an open manner. "You have quite an opinion for someone of your station," the ambassador said, his voice cold now. "But perhaps you should remember your place, human." Liam's stance remained unshaken. He didn't feel threatened by the ambassador's words. He wasn't interested in power, and he certainly wasn't afraid of it. He simply wanted Syria to have the time and freedom to make her own choices, to not feel pressured by the expectations of those who didn't understand her. Syria felt a flicker of gratitude at Liam's defense. She had spent so long being pushed and pulled by others, never having a moment to breathe. Now, for the first time, someone was standing up for her. It was an unfamiliar feeling, but it was also a welcome one. "I believe," Kazuria said, her voice calm and firm, "that I will take my time, Ambassador, and when I am ready, I will make the decision that is best for me, not for anyone else." She didn't need to say more. Her words were clear, and the room fell silent. The ambassador, though taken aback by her response, quickly regained his composure. "Very well, Princess," he said with a forced bow. "I shall leave you to it." With a final glance at Liam, he turned and walked away, his group following reluctantly behind him. As they left, Liam turned to Syria with a small smile. "That wasn't so hard, was it?" Syria smiled back, a small but genuine smile. For the first time in her life, she felt as if she were in control. She had spoken up for herself, made a choice that felt true to who she was. It wasn't much, but it was a start. "I don't think I've ever felt so free," she admitted softly. Liam's eyes sparkled. "Then maybe we should make the most of it." And in that moment, Syria realized that this evening had changed more than just her future. It had changed how she saw herself, and how she would choose to live from now on. The night passed quickly, and the grand hall of Zora's palace began to quiet down as the event drew to a close. The guests, having made their alliances and decisions, started to retreat to their chambers. But for Syria, the evening was far from over. The royal gathering had only been a prelude to what awaited her, the ancient trial that all members of the royal family were required to undergo when it came time to choose a partner. Syria had known about the trial for her entire life. It was a tradition that had been passed down through generations, a ritual meant to test the strength and worthiness of potential rulers. This trial wasn't just about physical strength or political strategy. It was a test of control, wisdom, and the ability to use the mysterious energy that her people had possessed for centuries. It was a heavy burden, one that she had never truly questioned until now. The evening's events had stirred something inside her, something that had been buried for years. For the first time, Syria felt the pull of her own desires, her own dreams, not the ones forced upon her by duty or tradition. But tonight, she had to face the trial, an unavoidable part of her future. As the guests dispersed, Syria and Liam found themselves standing at the edge of the hall, near a large door that led to the royal chambers. Syria's hands were clenched at her sides, and her face showed a hint of worry. She had always been prepared for this trial, but now, in the wake of everything that had happened, she wasn't sure if she was ready. Liam, sensing her unease, turned to her. "Are you okay?" Syria looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mixture of determination and uncertainty. "I'm about to face the trial. It's something I've been trained for all my life. But now, I wonder if I've ever been truly ready." Liam smiled gently, though there was no arrogance in his expression. He could sense the weight she carried, the pressure of being born into a role she never asked for. "I'm sure you'll do great. You've been preparing for this your whole life. And besides, you're not alone. You've got me here, whether you like it or not." Syria gave him a faint smile, her heart warming slightly at his words. For the first time, she wasn't facing the trial alone. She had someone who believed in her, someone who saw her for who she was, not just as a princess. "You don't know what you're saying, Liam," she said softly, her voice filled with uncertainty. "The trial isn't just about strength or power. It's about controlling energy that has been passed down through generations. It's dangerous. If I fail, I could lose everything." Liam's expression softened. "You won't fail. You have more strength inside you than you realize." Syria took a deep breath, then nodded. "I have to try. I can't keep hiding behind the veil forever." With that, she pushed open the door to the royal chamber and stepped inside. The room was dimly lit, with soft blue light coming from the crystal chandeliers that hung from the ceiling. At the center of the room was a raised platform where the trial would take place. The air was thick with anticipation as the royal advisors and witnesses gathered in the shadows. Zaria walked to the platform, her footsteps echoing in the silence. She could feel the eyes of the room on her, the weight of their expectations pressing down on her, but she didn't let it break her. She stood tall, her heart beating steadily in her chest. This was her moment, her chance to prove not just to the court, but to herself that she could be more than just a figurehead. She could be a ruler. Liam stood at the edge of the platform, watching closely. He didn't fully understand the nature of the trial, but he knew one thing. Zaria was more than capable of handling whatever came her way. He had seen the strength in her, even when she doubted herself. As the trial began, the royal advisors raised their hands, signaling the start. Zaria closed her eyes and focused, summoning the energy that flowed through her veins. The room seemed to hum with the power that she called upon, an ancient force that only the royal family could control. Zaria's hands began to glow with a soft light, the energy swirling around her. The task was simple. She had to create an energy shield, something that would protect her from the incoming forces that would be unleashed upon her. But the trial was not about just surviving the attack. It was about maintaining control of the energy. Yes, filled with understanding. Only you can decide that, Zaria. But I think you've already taken the first step. You've already shown who you really are. You don't need the veil to prove your strength or your worth. Zaria nodded slowly, her fingers still tracing the edge of the veil. She had always been told that the veil was sacred, that it was a symbol of her power, her purity, her untouchable status. But now, in this moment of clarity, it felt like a weight she no longer needed to carry. With a deep breath, Zaria reached up and lifted the veil from her face. As the fabric fell away, she felt a rush of freedom, a sense of release she had never experienced before. For the first time in her life, she stood before someone, before Liam, not as a princess, but as a person. Her face was now fully visible, her delicate features framed by her long, dark hair. There were no hidden layers, no symbols of status. Just her, Zaria, the woman who had lived her life in the shadow of expectations, but who now stood in the light of her own choices. Liam's eyes widened in admiration as he looked at her, his gaze soft and filled with warmth. "You're even more beautiful than I imagined," he said, his voice gentle but sincere. Zaria's heart fluttered at his words, but more than that, she felt a sense of pride. Pride not in her appearance, but in the decision she had made. She had taken off the veil, not because someone had told her to, but because she wanted to. She had chosen to be herself, to stop hiding behind the mask that had been placed upon her at birth. "I've spent so long hiding," Zaria said softly, her voice full of emotion. "But now I want to live as who I truly am. Not just a princess, not just a figurehead. I want to be seen for who I really am." Liam smiled at her, his eyes shining with pride. "And I see you, Zaria, the real you." For the first time, Zaria felt seen. Truly seen. She had stepped out from behind the veil, and in doing so, she had found herself. As the night wore on, Zaria knew that her life was about to change. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time, she was ready to face it on her own terms. She didn't need the approval of others. She didn't need to wear the veil anymore. What mattered now was the path she would choose, and who she would choose to walk it with. The days after the trial felt like a blur to Zaria. The events of the royal gathering had left her feeling both lighter and more uncertain than ever before. She had removed the veil, not just physically, but emotionally as well. The weight of years of tradition, expectations, and isolation had lifted from her shoulders, but now she stood at the edge of a new world, one she wasn't entirely sure she was ready to face. Liam had been by her side through it all, offering words of comfort, encouragement, and above all, acceptance. He didn't look at her as a princess, as royalty, or as someone who had a kingdom to rule. He looked at her as a person with dreams, fears, and a heart that deserved to be free. His presence had given her the strength to make her own choices, and now, as she walked through the palace corridors, she felt a sense of freedom she had never known before. Xuria found herself standing by the large windows of her chamber, gazing out at the stars. The view was breathtaking. The Zorian palace was perched high on a cliff, offering a perfect view of the night sky. The stars twinkled in the distance, each one a reminder of the vastness of the universe and the possibilities that lay beyond her kingdom. For the first time, she wondered what it would be like to travel those stars, to see the world she had always read about, to explore, to discover, to live without the constant pressure of duty hanging over her head. "You seem lost in thought," a familiar voice said, breaking her from her reverie. Xuria turned to find Liam standing in the doorway, his warm smile making her heart skip a beat. His presence had become a source of comfort, and she was beginning to realize that he wasn't just a friend or an ally. He had become someone much more. "I was thinking about everything," Xuria admitted, her voice soft. "The trial, the veil, the kingdom. I don't know what to do now. There are so many expectations, so many people depending on me to lead them. I don't want to disappoint them, but at the same time, I don't want to lose myself in all of this." Liam walked over to her, his footsteps light and steady. "You don't have to be everything for everyone, Xuria. You've already proven yourself in ways that most people could never imagine. You've shown incredible strength, not just in the trial, but in deciding to live for yourself. That's something no one can take away from you." Xuria met his gaze, feeling the warmth of his words sink deep into her heart. "But what about the kingdom? What about the people who are counting on me to marry and create alliances? What if I can't do it the way they want me to?" "You're already doing it your way," Liam said, his voice calm but firm. "And that's what will make you a great leader. You'll lead with your heart, not with tradition. The people will follow you because you're genuine, because you're true to yourself. That's the kind of leader they need." Xuria felt a knot loosen in her chest. For so long, she had believed that her worth was tied to her title, her bloodline, and the alliances she could form. But now she was beginning to see that leadership wasn't about power or titles. It was about being real, being authentic, and leading with integrity. "I think I understand," she said softly. "I've been so focused on the role I was born into, the expectations placed on me, that I forgot to listen to my own heart. But you're right. I need to do this my way." Liam smiled and reached out to gently touch her shoulder, a simple gesture, but one that felt full of meaning. "You've got this. You've already proven that you're more than capable, and I'll be right here beside you, no matter what." Xuria felt a surge of gratitude and warmth at his words. It was strange how much she had come to rely on him in such a short amount of time. He had become her anchor in the storm of expectations and tradition that had surrounded her for so long. As the days passed, Xuria began to take more control of her destiny. She called meetings with her advisors, not to discuss political marriages or alliances, but to explore new ways of leading the kingdom, ways that aligned with her values and her vision for the future. She reached out to other planets and leaders, not to form alliances for the sake of power, but to create partnerships built on trust, mutual respect, and shared goals. One afternoon, as Xuria sat in the palace gardens with Liam, watching the sun dip below the horizon, she realized just how much had changed. The Zorian palace, once a symbol of her duty and her isolation, now felt like a place where she could breathe, where she could shape her own future. "I've been thinking," Xuria said, her voice thoughtful. "Maybe it's time to start exploring the galaxy. I don't want to just sit here and rule from behind the walls of this palace. There's so much out there. I want to see it all." Liam turned to her, his eyes wide with surprise. "You mean leave Zora?" Xeria nodded. "Yes, I think it's time. The kingdom will be fine without me for a little while. I want to see the stars, meet new people, experience the universe outside of these walls, and I want to do it with you." Liam smiled, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. "I'd go anywhere with you, Xeria. Anywhere." And in that moment, Xeria realized that the future wasn't just about the kingdom, the trial, or the expectations of others. It was about her, the real her, and the life she was choosing to build for herself. She had the power to make her own decisions, to chart her own course, and to live a life that was true to who she was.